You know what I can't get enough of? Mental models. You know me, I'm always on the hunt for new mental models. So here in this video are exactly 1 dozen mental models. And this is also a nested list, meaning it's a tier list inside of a tier list. You'll get the point after a little while. The final tier list will be shown at the end, but let's get to it. Okay, the first mental model is this idea of kayfabe. You've heard of kayfabe. Well, F tier kayfabe is when you use the term kayfabe as just a synonym for lying, as in, my friend said he was going to call me back, but he didn't. It was totally kayfabe. That's definitely F tier, not using the term correctly. C tier kayfabe is kayfabe as a synonym for acting, as in, I pretend to be cool when I meet new people, but it's just kayfabe. That's C tier. B tier kayfabe is kayfabe as a synonym for acting, which people know is acting, as in, these musicians are only pretending to be beefing with each other, but people enjoy it because they know it's just for show. That's B tier kayfabe. A tier kayfabe is kayfabe as a synonym for acting bleeding into real life, as in, politicians hating on each other is mostly just kayfabe, but these two politicians in particular really do hate each other. So you get to A tier generally when you've seen one too many YouTube essays on pro wrestling is actually more real than people think, and that's where you start using A tier kayfabe. Then you get to S tier kayfabe when you're talking kayfabe as a synonym for social performativity theory, like this micro celebrity. She's just performing the trad wife role, but it's totally kayfabe because maybe at a certain point you actually become the thing because your identity actually becomes what you act out, but it's also for show. That's a top tier kayfabe. Moving on to the next mental model. The next mental model is Gellman Amnesia. But we'll start with S tier this time. S tier is your reference to Gellman Amnesia includes clever subversion. Like, this person, he's acting like a reverse Gellman Amnesia. When this person talks about something that I know a lot about, they sound like they know what they're talking about. But as soon as they start talking about something I don't know what they're talking about, then they just sound crazy. That's like S tier Gellman Amnesia, is you're clever subverting the topic of it. A tier Gellman Amnesia is you can get through a reference to Gellman Amnesia without boring everyone with a lengthy explanation of it for the billionth time. A B tier Gellman Amnesia is your reference to Gellman Amnesia includes a throwaway comment about how you, of course, are too smart to fall for Gellman Amnesia because you are such a skeptical person that you vet all your sources through 10 third parties, so you would, of course, never fall for Gellman Amnesia. C tier Gellman Amnesia is your reference to Gellman Amnesia includes a thinly veiled attack on a news source that you don't like. D tier Gellman Amnesia is your reference to Gellman Amnesia includes 2 or more mentions to a newspaper. You're describing Gellman Amnesia and you tell the whole story about how you walk up to a newspaper and you're reading on the front page of the newspaper and it's a topic about the Middle East and you're like, I know about the Middle East. And then you read the newspaper and you say, this article doesn't know what it's talking about. But then you flip to the next page, and by flipping the page of the newspaper, it's like you have amnesia. You don't even remember that the last page of the newspaper was totally wrong. And now you're reading an article about nuclear physics, and you're like, oh, this is so interesting. And you don't even clock that it's totally wrong as well. That's Gellman Amnesia. So if that's your explanation of it, that's definitely D tier. F tier Gellman Amnesia is that your description of Gellman Amnesia includes 2 or more mentions of the theoretical physicist Marie Gell-Mann. But this video would be incomplete if we weren't going to cover the most interesting concept on this whole list, which is Schrodinger's cat. So what is Schrodinger's cat F tier? F tier is Schrodinger's cat to mean something that is 2 things at once. For example, the house is blue, but it is also large. It's like Schrodinger's house. We don't know if it's blue or large. That's definitely F tier. D tier Schrodinger's cat is Schrodinger's cat to mean a combination of 2 opposite things. So this time, at least, they're sort of opposite. The movie sucked, but I also loved it. It's like Schrodinger's movie. Doesn't really fit, but getting a little closer. It's D tier. C tier Schrodinger's cat is Schrodinger's cat to mean something that has 2 mutually exclusive states, as in, house prices are like Schrodinger's economics. High house prices is either great news or horrible news, depending on who you are. It's like Schrodinger's house prices. That's like C tier. B tier is you're getting closer to the true definition of Schrodinger's cat, which is Schrodinger's cat to mean a reductio ad absurdum, like utilitarianism is wrong, because if it were right, then it would imply that we should kill sad people. It's just like how Schrodinger's cat proves the absurdity of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. That's like Schrodinger's B tier. A tier is like Schrodinger's cat to mean how one person's modus ponens becomes another person's modus tollens, meaning as in, If utilitarianism were true, this would mean we should kill sad people. And utilitarianism is true, therefore we should kill sad people. It's just like Schrodinger's cat, which is actually wasn't intended as this, but it's a demonstration of the truth of superpositions. S-tier Schrodinger's cat is Schrodinger's cat as in you believe in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, so you're using the word Schrodinger's cat just to refer to the superposition of all possible combinations, as in this Minecraft wave function collapse world generation algorithm is like Schrodinger's level design. There could be an ocean, there could be a desert here, you don't know until you get there. The next mental model is cargo cult. So F-tier cargo cult is you say cargo cult because you're trying to demean the Melanesian people for their silly superstitious beliefs. D-tier cargo cult is you say cargo cult because you're trying to use it as a metaphor for the silliness of religion writ large. C-tier cargo cult is you say cargo cult as a metaphor for the cognitive bias of confusing the past with the present. B-tier cargo cult is you say cargo cult as a metaphor for the cognitive bias of confusing correlation with causation. A-tier cargo cult is you use the term cargo cult as a metaphor for the naive melancholy of longing for a past that can never truly be returned to. S-tier is you don't say cargo cult at all because you prefer to say ghost dance instead, which is actually a better metaphor in most cases. The next mental model is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So what is F-tier Dunning-Kruger? F-tier is you use Dunning-Kruger as a generic insult to call people stupid without even really knowing what the Dunning-Kruger effect actually refers to. D-tier Dunning-Kruger is you just use Dunning-Kruger to refer to how people who are less intelligent or competent tend to consider themselves smarter or more capable than they actually are due to arrogance. C-tier Dunning-Kruger is you use the term Dunning-Kruger as motivation porn to refer to the generic learning curve, where your knowledge goes up and you deepen your understanding depending on your familiarity of the subject matter. B-tier Dunning-Kruger is you use the term Dunning-Kruger to refer to the cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge or competence in a domain tend to overestimate their knowledge or competence in that domain. A-tier Dunning-Kruger is you use Dunning-Kruger to refer to the statistical artifact where the original measurement of Dunning-Kruger was flawed for a number of reasons, sort of like one thing is regression to the mean, where if you have people rate themselves, then there's some noise in that measurement, so it's not going to be a perfect correlation between rated ability and actual ability. So insofar as you're measuring that noise and you're ranking people accordingly, then people are going to regress to the mean because they can't perfectly estimate themselves. But people on the further end of the extreme are going to be more affected by that, similar to like how the old joke where when you have two people take a test, one person gets 100 and another person gets a 98. The person who gets a 98 says, we got almost the same, and the person who got 100 says, well, that's just the maximum score. I could have gotten way more than 100 if that was an available score. Well, similarly, on the bounds, number one is it creates the bounds, which creates the limitations to that, as I just explained. Another thing is because you're further away from the mean, then you're more affected by the regression to the mean, because there's more space for the noise to persist. And so A tier is you just know that for the most part, the Dunning-Kruger effect is picking up on that phenomenon. S tier is you use the Dunning-Kruger effect to refer to the phenomenon where people ignorant of Dunning-Kruger will believe in Dunning-Kruger, thus paradoxically proving Dunning-Kruger to be real. The next mental model is one of my favorites. It's canary in a coal mine. F tier is you use the phrase canary in a coal mine because you think it's an analogy for how coal mines are scary, and you think that canary in a coal mine must be like generically referring to something scary. D tier is you use the phrase canary in a coal mine because you think it's an analogy to something that doesn't belong in its surroundings. Like it's so weird a canary doesn't belong in the coal mine, you think that's what canary in a coal mine is referring to. C tier is you like the phrase canary in a coal mine because you like the story about how coal miners used to take canaries into mines to detect deadly odorless gases, specifically carbon dioxide and methane, and when the birds stopped singing or they fainted, then you knew you had to get out of there. B tier is you like the phrase canary in a coal mine because you really like the alliteration. That, I think, it's B tier, but it should be higher, honestly. A tier is you like the phrase canary in a coal mine because you like birds, especially canaries. And S tier is you like the phrase canary in a coal mine because coal mines are like your autistic special interest. So that's canary in a coal mine. Don't you like how I got through that whole thing in one take for canary in a coal mine? Man, I'm getting better at this. Don't you enjoy my reading through this and my delivery? Don't you think my delivery is getting better? I mean, It was rough there, but it's getting better, and we're almost halfway through. Aren't you having so much fun? The next mental model, I mean, you have to do some creative liberty here, okay? I understand I'm calling all of these mental models, but just go with me. The next mental model is the Turing Test. So, what is the F-tier Turing Test? Well, don't hate me for this, but I think the F-tier version of the Turing Test is the theoretical Turing Test, like the original Turing Test that was used as a thought experiment to explain hypothetical future abilities of computers, theorized by Alan Turing. The D-tier Turing test is CAPTCHAs, because CAPTCHAs, what are they but literally just am I a robot, testing if you're a robot to try to differentiate humans from robots. So it is a sort of practical, real-world Turing test, but no one would really call that a Turing test. The C-tier Turing test is the literal Turing test, as in we actually invented machines that are pretty good at emulating humans, like ChatGPT, and they can talk like a human pretty accurately, and in a lot of experiments they actually pass the Turing test with flying colors. They can win a game of diplomacy. So at this point, you have to say that in the literal Turing test, the machines have already won. The B-tier Turing test is the Francois Chollet Turing test. Did I pronounce that right? Well, Francois Chollet has his own special version of the Turing test, which says that the Turing test only counts if you get to witness the life story of the machine leading up to that event, and even then, knowing the life story, you still think that the Turing test is passed. Actually, I think that one should be lower. A-tier Turing test is the ideological Turing test. We all love this. I mean, it beats the hell out of Steel Manning or Devil's Advocate or other inferior expressions. But with the ideological Turing test, it's whether or not you can parrot back your ideological opponent's political position or ideological position in such a way that's accurate enough that even your opponent themselves would agree with. So that's very valuable and very useful. And the S-tier Turing test is the reverse Turing test. The reverse Turing test is instead of the machines trying to trick us into us thinking that they're human, it's us trying to trick the machines into them thinking that we are machines, which is a lot harder and is actually pretty interesting. My next mental model is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which this is going to be a weird one because I don't list them in order, but I'm going to do it a bit different. I'm going to put each different need on its own tier, but I'm not going to align with the order of the pyramid. So what I'm going to say is, and this is kind of random, but it's a lot based on vibes, F tier, the worst need, is F, esteem needs, second from the bottom. Who needs esteem needs? C tier is physiological needs. That's the one that's at the bottom, but I put it at C tier. B tier is self-actualization needs, which the pyramid puts at the top, but I put as B tier. A tier needs is love and belonging needs, which other people put in the middle, but I think love and belonging needs is A tier. We love our love and belonging needs. And then in S tier, which others put at second from the bottom, but I put it S tier, is our safety needs. We love our safety needs. The next concept is the Stanford prisoner experiment. So the F tier Stanford prisoner experiment is referring to the Stanford prisoner experiment as a shorthand for the innate cruelty and evil of mankind. C tier Stanford prisoner experiment is referring to the Stanford prisoner experiment as a shorthand for scientific ethics, as an example of a time that science took it too far. B-tier Stanford prisoner experiment is referring to the Stanford prisoner experiment as a shorthand for flawed scientific methodology. Small sample size, no replication, non-representative sample, experimental intervention, subjective measurement, all sorts of things. Although you have to admit that the issue of non-replication could be solved if the ethics committees would just get out of the way and let us try to replicate it. A-tier Stanford prisoner experiment is referring to the Stanford prisoner experiment as a great experiment in human conformity, an example of showing that you can make large swaths of people believe into something despite its flawed underlying scientific methodology. S-tier Stanford prisoner experiment is referencing the Stanford prisoner experiment as a shorthand for the innate evil of Philip Zimbardo for being a single-study man who cynically used this study to boost his career, despite its flawed methodology. But say what you will about the Stanford prisoner experiment, you do have to admit, out of everything on this list, this does have by far the most sick name. The next mental model is the 5 love languages, popularized by Baptist professor Gary Chapman. F tier is you think that love languages are like actual languages. This may actually be the opinion of Gary Chapman, but saying if my love language is quality time and your love language is gift giving, then we might as well be speaking foreign languages, as if my language was English and your language was French, We just can't communicate. If you have that opinion, that's definitely F tier. C tier love languages is you think that a person can only have one canonical love language at a time. My love language is physical touch. Your love language is quality time. And if my love language is physical touch, that means I don't understand any of the other love languages. I can only get love through physical touch because it's binary like that. B tier love languages is you believe that all of this love language talk is just a socially acceptable or coded way for partners to talk what they want from each other, as in my love language is words of affirmation, where it'd be more awkward to accuse your partner of saying you don't affirm me enough or something. So you have to use this like double entendre fancy love language in order to explain my love language or words of affirmation, because then it makes it about you and what you need as opposed to accusing your partner, which is much less healthy. The A tier view on love languages is you think that the whole love language thing is just a coded way to acknowledge gender differences without being accused of being sexist, as in his love language is words of affirmation and physical touch, her love language is gift giving and quality time, and then the two genders can give each other what they want and everyone can live in harmony. The S tier belief on love languages is you think that love languages are just a socially acceptable way for the high sex drive partner to ask the low sex drive partner for more sex, and the low sex drive partner to ask the high sex drive partner for more of the other things that he or she wants. As in, hey babe, my love language is physical touch. Will you indulge me? I'll indulge your love language for gift giving. Although, a lot of times it can be a lot less cynical than that. Now that we're on the theme of fives, the next mental model that involves five of something is the 5 stages of grief. Now, I'm not even going to bother coming up with my own ideas on this, because as far as I'm concerned, the cartoon Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal already wrote the canonical interpretation of different stages of this. F tier is you're in denial that anyone would ever seriously propose that grief comes in discrete stages. D tier is you're angry, it's just something someone made up. C tier is you're bargaining. Maybe if you see it as literature and not science, then it's okay. B tier is you're depressed that people are treating the model as a biological fact. And A tier is you've accepted that it's not even one of the worst psych theories of the 60s. To top it off, we can talk about the John B. Calhoun behavioral sync mouse utopia experiments. So we all know what the F tier interpretation of the mouse utopia experiments is. It's the Malthusian interpretation that overpopulation is the big problem and it's going to cause the end of the world as there's not enough resources to support the ever-growing population. The D tier interpretation is the collapse interpretations, the idea of moral collapse, abundance collapse. These different sort of collapse interpretations say, look, if you have this utopia, there's no reason to have any morals. It's sort of a conservative interpretation of the 60s that says, look, people have become degenerate. If you just give everyone everything that they need, then they're not going to have to work for anything, and then they don't build character, and so that causes a collapse in these social roles. The C tier interpretation is similar, but it's slightly different. It's the alienation interpretation, the focus on the beautiful ones as being modern-day hikikomori or incels, or the idea of role exhaustion, where if you don't have a well-respected place in society, that causes social collapse because people don't have any need for themselves and they don't have any place in society. The B tier interpretation is the neo-reactionary interpretation. It's talking about how the beautiful ones are example of like spiteful mutants if you use vocabulary like that. It's like anti-dysgenics if you use words like bio-Leninism or cultural Marxism and you're talking about how this means something important about biology or whatnot. That's at least interesting enough to be generous and give it B tier. The A tier interpretation is the skeptic's interpretation. The idea that mice aren't like humans, they're so different than humans that we can't really extrapolate anything from these experiments. The environments were unnatural, they were only observable under lab conditions. It was just such an unnatural environment that these mice were in that you can't really extrapolate onto humans anything. The S tier interpretation is the Georgist interpretation, which still sort of focuses on the overpopulation aspect, but the true crime is not the fact that the population expanded that much, it was the fact that you did not actually have an excess of resources because there was a shortage of land. It's really a level design problem. You have this small restricted cage, and that forces the overpopulation, but only because you're artificially forcing the mice into a certain number of slots, and you're even designing these interactions in the cage so that there's only a limited number of places they can move around. So through the construction of the cage and the small enclosure, you're limiting the amount of land that can be occupied by the mice, and this is creating territoriality and all sorts of problems. If you got anything from this video, I hope you go on, click on my channel, watch my other videos, or if you don't want to watch any more right now, I hope you give me a subscribe because I don't get any views. So as a small channel, probably if you just navigate away, you're never going to see another video from me recommended again. So hopefully you'll give me a subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. And finally, here it is, the tier list of all the mental models stacked together. Okay, bye.